One of the most powerful and important themes in the Bible is the Exodus narrative. It's the foundation story of Israel and Judaism. It's very important for understanding Christianity, and it's also very important for understanding Islam. The Exodus narrative, of course, tells the story of the people of Israel being freed from the captivity of the Pharaoh and the Egyptians. The dramatic part of the story is, of course, the call of Moses and the burning bush, and then his encounter with Pharaoh and the ultimatums and the plagues, and then the institution of the Passover, and finally the escape across the sea after Pharaoh agrees to let them go and then changes his mind and decides to send the army out after them across the Red Sea, where the sea in the biblical story swallows up the chariots. I mean, you could make a movie out of that part of the story. And you could make a better movie than the one that was made, but do, by the way. But the truth of the matter is that the real meat and real meaningful part of the story, the Exodus story, is what happens after the people of Israel have achieved their freedom. The biblical story says that they get across the Red Sea and they stop there and they have this enormous celebration and a worship service, and they are so happy with the leadership of Moses and Aaron. And then they are ready to begin their journey, and they can't wait to get going across the wilderness so that they can reach to their homeland. But then, not long after they have started, this is what happens. The whole congregation of the Israelites set out from Elim, and Israel came to the wilderness, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt, so a month and a half after they left. And the whole congregation complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. They said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, where there we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us into this wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger." Hungry and grumpy. Reminds me of going away to college. And moving in with a bunch of guys and suddenly discovering there were not going to be any more home-cooked meals. It was so awesome to be away from home for the first time and to be free, to come and go as I please, to make my own decisions about how to use my time and how to use my money, to be living with a group of people my own age. It was absolutely awesome. I mean, freedom is wonderful. Everybody should be free. Nobody should ever be enslaved. No one should ever be denied the opportunity to vote, to work, or live where they wish to. Nobody should ever be denied the opportunity to marry the person they love, to grow up and then have the opportunity to go out and be on one's own. Freedom is an absolutely wonderful thing that everyone should have. And we want a world where everyone is free. But it's when we are free that we begin to discover the people that we really are. The biblical metaphor for that period of discovery is being in the wilderness, where we are tested and tempted. In an essay by Richard Rohr in his book Yes and the essay is called "An Exodus is the First Biblical Metaphor," Rohr says, "The Hebrew people entered the desert feeling themselves as a united and strong people, And you would think that perhaps they would have experienced greater strength as they continued. But not so. They experienced fragmentation and weariness. They experienced divisions among their people. They were not, after all, the people they thought they were. The Jewish Exodus is a rather perfect metaphor for spirituality. When all our idols are taken away, all our securities and defense mechanisms are gone, then we find out who we really are. And it's an absolutely essential part of growing up. Finally having that kind of freedom where we can be out on our own in the wilderness so we can discover who we are and face the challenges and the temptations that are always out there in life. This is why so many cultures throughout history have had some kind of a wilderness journey as part of their rituals from passing from youth to adulthood. And I think it's one of the things that we miss sorely for our youth these days, that we don't really work at having those kind of rituals for them more. But I actually want to shift gears slightly and tie this idea of being in the wilderness to one of our congregation's core values. We have our core values up around the wall here. And one of them is reaching the seekers. And it says, there are many people in our communities on a spiritual pilgrimage who have not found a home base. We offer them a place to call home while they walk the journey of faith. Seekers. The seeking metaphor is really a very popular metaphor for spirituality today. The seeker moniker comes out of this kind of enormous shift in religious practice that has happened over the last several decades in our country, as people all over the country have chosen to leave behind the religious experience of their upbringing because they have found it to be no longer meaningful for them, and to go out in search of something different. And so they have become known in the terminology of religious sociology as religious seekers, people who are out sampling different kinds of spirituality and religion till they find something that, if they find something, that they can call home. And there are millions and millions and millions of them in our country today. And to be a seeker is all about being free. It's this idea that there is no tradition that binds us. There is no religious heritage that need bind us. That we are free to go out, and we are free to be on our own and seek and find what is meaningful for ourselves in our lives. And some people are what I call dabbling seekers. There are people who never settle down. They move from one spiritual practice to another, from one community to another, and spend their entire adult life really just moving around and looking and searching and never settling down anywhere. And then there are people who are kind of loner spiritual seekers who walk out the door of a church and they never walk back in. And they walk into the woods or they walk somewhere else, and they spend the rest of their adult life as individual seekers. They stay away from people and communities as much as they can. But most seekers eventually become part of some kind of a religious community. Because, honestly, we are social animals. We really have this drive deep down inside of us, unless we are really wounded by family or by community. We have this drive in us to eventually find a community and be part of some kind of community. And because it's more fun to be part of a community and to do things together than it is to be alone. And because I think we realize at some level that we need others to help us grow, that we benefit from being part of a community where we are listening to each other and learning from each other and challenging each other and helping each other grow. So we find ourselves in communities. Most seekers do, and that includes many of us here. And when we come together as seekers, I think we are on that Exodus journey together. We step into that metaphor, that ancient biblical metaphor. And one of the things that we discover is that we can escape our traditions, but we cannot escape being human. That somehow or other goes with us wherever we go. And that means that wherever we go, whatever community we find ourselves to be a part of, there's going to be a certain amount of grumbling. Hungry and grumbling. And that means that wherever we go, we find ourselves among people where we have to make decisions about how we live together and how we work together. And whatever community we are a part of and choose to be a part of and seek together, that always happens. Happens in every single community. And in that biblical metaphor and narrative, that is how we find out who we really are. I really love the title of the book by Jack Kornfield, After the Ecstasy, the Laundry. Kornfield is a Buddhist, and he has some great books out about Buddhism and about good books about meditation. But this book, After the Ecstasy, the Laundry, he actually goes out and he interviews people from religious communities, from Buddhist communities, from Christian communities, from Jewish communities, and talks to them about what it's like to be a part of the communities that they are part of that they find meaningful. That's why they're there. And as his title suggests, his larger point in the book is that in every religious tradition that you find yourselves a part of, there are mountaintop experiences. That's the ecstasy. There are those meditation retreats where you go off and you spend your time meditating, you just get so energized and feel at peace and meaningful, and then you come back. And there are the big conferences, and there are, many of us grew up in religious experiences where we went off to camp and continued to go off to camp and had these awesome camping experiences. And those are the mountaintop ecstasy experiences. But no matter what religious tradition we are part of and what community we are part of, after the ecstasy, there is still the laundry. There is the everyday life, not on the mountaintop, but in the wilderness, among the people that we are traveling with. And every person he talks to in that book says the same thing. This, in the everyday life, is where the real spiritual growth happens, when and if it happens. Where we really learn who we are as a people and as individuals as we learn to live together as a community. It took the people of Israel an awful long time to figure that out. The people of Israel wandered in the wilderness, the Bible says, for 40 years before they found the promised land. 40 years is a metaphor for a very long time. But it also happens to be the typical span of an adult life, from late teens to that time when we pass into the golden age, where there is maturity and there is wisdom and arthritis. Yeah. Like I said, there's always a little grumbling. While we are in the wilderness, there are survival skills to be learned, which include learning to make responsible choices about how we use our time and resources. And I think many of us had those experiences. We went off by ourselves, and some of us had to learn the hard way about using money and using time and studying and all of those kind of things, and that's part of that wilderness experience. But the Exodus story also suggests that in that spiritual journey in the wilderness, the biggest lesson is to learn to trust. To learn to trust that God will provide what we need. That we will not always immediately know, have, be able to figure out what we need. But if we trust that we will find, and it will be there. And what I take to mean by that is that the resources that we need are there or here. That they are here in us already, and we have to discover them and learn how to use them. And that they are here among us, and that we have to discover them together and learn how to use them. And that our largest and most challenging spiritual growing edge is not to do, not to work harder, but it is to learn to trust. It is to learn to let go of expectations, as the people of Israel had, and just to learn to trust themselves and each other and God. And in that journey, that lifelong journey of moving through that, we find that what we need, we will find. And that what we will need, we will find. And we will find it together as a community and as individuals. And that's where we will gain our strength as a community. And that's where we will be ready then for whatever next stage in our lives comes along. Thank you for listening. Amen.